Well, welcome back to Faytene TV and friends. Today we are picking up the life and death conversation of the possible expansion of medical assistance in dying right here in Canada to include the mentally vulnerable, possibly by 2027. My guests are Nicole Scheidl from Physicians for Life and Amanda Achtman from Dying to Meet You, the media project.
People can only know their identity in relation to others, and people can only have a revived sense of worth when they receive the love of others. And so we have to be willing to put ourselves into it in a gritty way. No abstractions, only presence.
If we don't have people to take care of, we never grow in generosity and love. And we are so connected to each other that as soon as we start removing these connections and saying it's easier to end someone's life than try to walk with them, we turn our medical system into a really callous system.
Canada is once again at a moral crossroads when it comes to medical assistance in dying, also known as MAiD. To recap, since 2016, it has moved from a narrow and end-of-life measure to something far broader. Unless our nation changes course, MAiD for the mentally vulnerable alone is currently scheduled to come into force in March of 2027. This after Parliament passed Bill C-62 to delay the expansion at the request of medical professionals who simply didn't feel ready to deal with the complexities surrounding the expansion. Well, today we're asking, what does this mean for the most vulnerable among us, and what can we do to ensure that our precious loved ones and our neighbors are protected? To understand the scale, the latest federal report is for 2023, and this report shows that over 15,000 Canadians received MAiD in that year. It represented about 1 in 20 deaths nationwide. While most cases were for those whose death was reasonably foreseeable and terminal, a growing share, over 600 people in 2023 were approved despite the fact that their death was not reasonably foreseeable. That trend line matters because it frames the debate about adding mental illness as a sole criterion. Many Canadians, health professionals, faith leaders, disability advocates, and family members are asking whether expanding MAiD in this particular way protects dignity or places people at risk precisely when they need hope, treatment, and community. Recently, Member of Parliament Tamara Jansen introduced Bill C-218, the Right to Recover Act. And if this bill is passed, it would prevent MAiD for mental illness as a sole condition and instead prioritize recovery care and companionship for those suffering. The question before us is not merely legal, but it's profoundly personal, moral, and societal. To help us navigate the issue at hand and how we can protect our loved ones, we're joined today by two expert voices on the topic. Nicole Scheidl, Executive Director of Canadian Physicians for Life. She brings a frontline perspective on ethics, clinical practice, and what true compassion looks like in medicine. Amanda Achtman is the producer of the profound Dying to Meet You project, a film series working across Canada to reshape our cultural conversation around suffering, meaning, and hope, calling us to meet people in their pain with presence and purpose. Such an important conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get to it. Well, Nicole and Amanda, thank you so much for joining me once again today. You are no strangers to our regular viewers and have been consistent voices on this issue of the expansion of medical assistance in dying. So, Nicole, why don't we begin with you? You are representing the medical profession, and you are constantly dialoguing with our medical professionals from across Canada. How are they all feeling about the possible expansion of medical assistance in dying for the mentally vulnerable, and what are the key things that you're really watching right now as we head towards the fall parliamentary session?
Well, they're very concerned about it. The majority of psychiatrists across the country, including all the major associations that represent psychiatrists, are completely against it. There's no way for them to have a really good handle on whether someone's going to, or predict, for example, whether someone's going to get better from their mental illness or not. So determining that someone should be euthanized solely for mental illness is really, really difficult to do. And most psychiatrists are completely opposed to it.
Right, which is very telling. Now, it has consistently been noted that Canada is incredibly progressive on this issue when you compare us to where other nations are at. Can you shed some light on that for Canadians as well?
Well, in Canada, our legal framework is, as you said, the most permissive jurisdiction in the world. We are euthanizing people at a rate not seen anywhere else in the world. You can be euthanized on the same day that it's determined that you qualify. So there's no waiting period, there's no reflection period. The physicians themselves can suggest it to you. It does not have to be patient initiated. Many times, patients feel like they're being pushed in that direction, that they have no other options. Wait times are very long in this country. You can understand why people start to feel very desperate. And so it seems that we have integrated euthanasia and assisted suicide so much into our medical system that it's becoming a significant component of it.
Yeah, and nobody ever thought we would be here. I remember back in 2014 to 16, that window where the debate was really coming onto the fore. And everybody said over and over again, this is going to be rare. This is going to be only for terminal illnesses where death is imminent. And yet here we are, where people who don't even want it, aren't asking for it, are regularly being offered it. And, your work, Amanda, with the Dying to Meet You project, you've really shed some light on this dynamic and this reality. What have been some of your dominant observations as you've been producing your films?
One thing I'm noticing is that euthanasia is touching more and more of us, with more than 70,000 Canadians who have been euthanized since legalization. That means that almost no one in Canada lacks some personal experience of it. And that goes to Nicole's point about how prevalent this is. It is changing our culture. Now there are obituaries that mention MAiD as the cause of death. And now we are seeing more and more professions touched and affected in ways that you wouldn't anticipate. The legal profession, media, all different paramedics being called to a botched MAiD death, all kinds of implications that have ramifications for the wider culture. And since I'm a millennial, one of the main ways that I'm hearing about it is that my friends are losing their grandparents this way, are finding out that their grandparent is opting for a premature end to their life. And this riddles an already anxious generation with the question, why wasn't I worth staying in the world for?
Wow, is that the dominant response that you're hearing from the next generation?
One thing that's very difficult is for people to oppose their family member's decision. There seems to be a need to cover or to justify. It's very difficult, especially in such an atmosphere of vulnerability as end of life presents, to criticize. But we need to be able to love the person while rejecting this decision of losing them prematurely. It is always loving to oppose euthanasia. In fact, euthanasia is quite literally the opposite of love, because love says to the person, it's good you exist and I want you to be here. And euthanasia says, maybe you would be better off dead. And so it will always, always be loving to mount some resistance to that suicidal ideation that emerges toward end of life. But many people are conflicted and instead think that the only thing that they can do is affirm the decision. You can affirm the loved one best, even when you reject their decision.
Powerful, profound. Nicole, I'm thinking about the doctor. So to speak to that doctor scenario where they are in a situation where somebody is requesting medical assistance and dying, and they know that this person's path could turn, that things could get better, that we all have down points in our lives, particularly when it comes to mental illness. Probably most Canadians have had a season in their life that was a little bit darker than others, and yet there was a sunrise on the other side. How are you weighing into this conversation with the doctors that you serve in terms of how they interface in that moment?
Well, doctors are really caught. Their professional bodies are telling them that they have to raise, in some provinces, that they have to raise euthanasia or MAiD as a possibility in any situation that's appropriate. And given our permissive legislation, it's appropriate almost in every situation. It could be a treatment option for people. And so doctors are really caught. There's also a huge erosion of trust in the doctor-patient relationship, because if a patient who's not considering it hears from their doctor, oh, this is an option for you, all of a sudden they're wondering, is my doctor really going to do what's best for me? Are they going to really fight hard for me? Are they going to really try and get the best treatment for me? Whether or not that worry is true, it is already plants that seed in the patient's mind. And then for physicians who conscientiously object or don't think it's the right thing for their patient, they want to use their medical judgment, they feel constrained that they're not allowed to use their medical judgment for appropriate treatment, because the college could come down on them and they could lose their license. And so that's something that really affects doctors. And unfortunately, in this country, we don't have any conscience protections for doctors or nurses, except for in Manitoba. And so they are concerned that if they run afoul of the college because of this particular piece of legislation, they might no longer be able to practice medicine.
Wow, that's absolutely chilling, particularly when you consider that Section 2 of the Canadian Charter is supposed to protect freedom of conscience, and yet in this one domain, it seems to be on pause. Let's talk to the person who's concerned about their loved one or about their neighbor who maybe has a sibling, maybe has a son or a daughter that's going through a rough patch, or a parent. How do we protect our vulnerable loved ones? Amanda, why don't you weigh into that first?
The first thing I would say is this cannot be a matter of abstract principles. So saying something about the value of life or the dignity of the human person is probably not the message that someone needs in a moment of vulnerability and perhaps despair. So first and foremost, we have to stand in there and remind people who they are and who we are for them. It's not about it simply, it's not a self-centered concern. It's not principally about my devastation at losing someone, but it's about reminding that person whose life is at stake and whose life is in question of their identity. And people can only know their identity in relation to others. And people can only have a revived sense of worth when they receive the love of others. And so we have to be willing to put ourselves into it in a gritty way. No abstractions, only presence.
Yes, people need to know that they will be missed. Just to bottom line that in simplicity, that they are loved and they will be missed. Nicole, how do you speak to that conversation?
Well, actually, if I could offer a personal anecdote. So my father died this past May, and over the last year, we had many conversations. And at one point, he was sitting on the couch with me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, I just don't want to be a burden to you guys. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, I actually want you to be a burden to me. I want to be able to take care of you. It's really important to me, but also it's important for me to model to my children, because if I can't take care of you, how can I expect them to take care of me? And I think that's something we miss, is that if we don't have people to take care of, we never grow in generosity and love. And we are so connected to each other that as soon as we start removing these connections and saying it's easier to end someone's life than try to walk with them, we turn our medical system into a really callous system. And we can see that now, where people feel really like they're not taken care of anymore, that everything's efficient and fast, and there's no time to care for people as people. And that really robs us of our humanity when we're trying to access medical care. I think what we see in
Here at Faytene TV, we are committed to serving you by bringing topics and guests that you will rarely see on mainstream media. Topics such as freedom of speech and conscience, updates on controversial items like medical assistance in dying, the sanctity of life, human trafficking, respecting parents, and more. We're also committed to featuring ways that we can all give back to our communities as an expression of our faith to build a better Canada for the future. We love this nation and want to ensure that we leave it better off for the sake of future generations. But we can't do it without your help. If you would like to see more programs produced on topics that matter to us all, please visit Faytene.tv or call us at 1-866-844-0844 to donate today or become a monthly partner. Your support makes a real difference and helps us keep going strong. Thank you so much for your consideration. Let's speak to the suffering piece, because when I'm interacting with people around this conversation, a lot of times they'll say, if they're in favor of medical assistance in dying, or maybe, I have a hairstylist that who's one of their loved ones chose medical assistance in dying, and she said, she was happy for the person because they didn't die in pain and they died on their own terms, as she put it. Talk about that, because I think there are people that are watching this right now that are probably in that mindset. And how does that affect society when this is kind of the track we're on?
First of all, if it comes down to a criterion of suffering, then it is not fundamentally, first and foremost, about choice. It's about there being a threshold of suffering whereby we have nothing to offer you except to end your life. And so you could consider two persons in the exact same degree of suffering. They have both met the threshold. They have both reached that extreme criterion. One person wants euthanasia and the other doesn't. How free is that other person? What is on option? Do they have an alternative? The reality is no. And so as soon as we make the criterion or a threshold at which it is reasonable, then everyone is excluded from the free choice not to have it. But if, on the other hand, the criterion is simply choice, and we have a very subjective set of criteria in Canada, if it is simply only when the suffering is intolerable to me, then that obliterates all suicide prevention efforts, because anyone wanting to end their life would be akin to making that choice that suffering has become intolerable. And so both are problematic, purely choice or a pure criterion of suffering. And we also have a responsibility to present better alternatives. There has to be something on offer. We are in one of the most developed, medically advanced, scientifically developed countries in the world. If we decide that we have nothing to offer the sick and the dying, that lowers and degrades the standard of care. And we don't find new cures and treatments because we are eliminating the very people who would justify that innovation and development.
Wow, insightful. Nicole.
Yeah, so I would say end of life with palliative care. Most palliative care physicians will tell you that they have never seen untreatable pain, that they have a vast array of options in their toolkit to treat pain. So pain can be dealt with. But often what people are talking about is not suffering from pain, but existential suffering, loss of meaning, loss of ability to interact with people or find meaning in their lives. And I think that's something where the rest of society can come around that person and make sure that they're supported. So I think sometimes we have to tease out, what do they actually mean by suffering at the end of their life? For many people, it's not pain per se. It's questions about meaning and relationship. And you don't really answer those questions by ending someone's life prematurely.
Well, I need to ask you this because you've been in this space for as long as I've been talking about the conversation. I think you've probably been one of our primary guests over the years. Is there anything that has really surprised you? Like, so back in 2016, you know, a lot of the language around this was regarding the warning and regarding slippery slopes and et cetera. But is there anything that has happened or rolled out that you just said, you know what, I literally didn't see that going that way?
Unfortunately, no. I think that once you open the door to euthanasia and allowing it and allowing that it's okay to kill some people, it's okay to end their lives for whatever reason. Once you open that door, it's really hard to draw a line. And I think what we see in our country is the natural consequences of walking across that line and saying some lives are not worth living anymore and we should end them.
Now, there is somebody, though, that is drawing a line, and her name is Tamara Jansen. She's a now re-elected member of Parliament who is bringing forward a bill to weigh into this. Nicole, tell our viewers about this bill.
So this is a bill that rolls back or permanently removes the sunset clause that was to bring into play a MAiD for mental illness so that you could be euthanized, you could have your life ended if the sole reason was mental illness. So that was initially part of the expansion of euthanasia, but then there was a problem with it, or I guess the colleges and the physicians who were interested in implementing this didn't think they were ready. So the government heard from a lot of people and put a pause on it. So it was a 1-year pause and a 2-year pause. Now that pause is supposed to come to an end in 2027. And MP Jansen has brought forward a private member's bill to make that pause permanent.
Mm-hmm. And this is a private member's bill, so it's not an official government bill. It's not officially being brought forward by the Conservative Party or by the Liberal Party or any other party. It's Tamara's bill. One of the individuals who weighed into this through a video, Amanda, was Andrew Lawton. I'm wondering what your response was in your heart when you saw Andrew's video.
MP Lawton is a newly elected MP, and he has a personal story about having attempted suicide. Of course, had he succeeded, had he committed suicide, that he would not be in Parliament, and he would not have lived all of the things that he has lived since then. And he tells that story very movingly about how it was possible for him through the right interventions and support to get better. That's his message. And I think it's particularly poignant that we have an elected official in the Parliament telling a personal story about this, because these stories touch everyone. Every family understands mental illness. Many people have suffered the loss of a loved one or a friend to suicide. And so to have this conversation at the national level, I think he's doing a great public service by sharing his own story. And what I always see is that when some person shares a story, especially someone in a position of influence, it liberates other people to share their stories, whether around the dinner table or publicly at a press conference. And that is good for our health as a society. That is one of the things that is uplifting and a basis for hope in the work that I do, because when we share these stories with one another, we become a shelter for these wounds and sorrows that we have experienced. We know that many driving reasons that people give by their own account, people actually going through with it, are existential, are connected to meaning, and so obviously are also related to mental health. We cannot perfectly separate or compartmentalize what is mental and what is physical suffering. We are a unity of mind and body. And so there's also this distorted view of the person. And what remedies that is when someone shares a story, because there you have the person before you, and they are speaking words and they are sharing thoughts, but they stand before you in their body, present, and you see that there's no easy compartmentalizing between the mental and the physical.
Well, it's clear that we're at another critical crossroads, in this whole trajectory. And we don't have a lot of time. Like, you might think, okay, 2027, March 2027, that feels so far away, but the reality is it will be here in a minute. And so what are you both saying to your networks and those that you influence in terms of how to be a positive contributor in this conversation right now? Nicole?
Well, we're really pushing hard with our members to speak to members of parliament in particular that the medical system is really not in a position to deal with this. And as Amanda spoke to, when you have MAiD for mental illness, you actually blow your suicide prevention programs out of the water. Because how can you decide who gets suicide prevention and who gets suicide assistance? And that's a big problem. And I don't think there's an easy solution. I think it's a conundrum that you cannot fix. Like, it's not something you can solve. And I think it's one of those unsolvable problems that suggests to us we should not walk down this road.
So important. Amanda, what are you saying to the people that you serve?
One of the things I would really emphasize is to draw the contrast, drive home the juxtaposition between natural death and the experiences you have of it and the experiences of euthanasia. Sometimes it's not clear. Sometimes euthanasia can seem compassionate. It can seem reasonable. But what I hear, especially from my peers who are losing their grandparents, they often say, well, my grandfather died naturally and then my grandmother died by MAiD, and here are the differences. And in that compare and contrast, there is a moral clarity. And I think I would encourage all of your viewers to have those conversations, share experiences that have been poignant and meaningful. Natural dying and death is not easy. It doesn't remove all of the sorrow, to be sure, but it does protect people from the anxiety and the rejection that they feel when someone decides that they are not worth staying in the world for. I would encourage also everyone to think in terms of we deserve better. There was just a newspaper article titled "Canada is Killing Itself." That's not what we want. We deserve better. Our loved ones deserve better. And so let's always cast a more positive alternative vision. That will be what redeems this culture of death and brings back the hope that our communities yearn and deserve.
Powerful. Well, you've given us so much to think about today. I really appreciate the depth of this conversation and your time. As we close, where can people find you and your important work?
So we are at physiciansforlife.ca, and you can sign up for a weekly newsletter that keeps you up to date with all the news and everything that we're doing. So we're happy to be found there.
And you can also check out dyingtomeetyou.com, check out the short films, and sign up for updates there as well.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us.
And thank you so much for joining us today. Conversations like this one matter because they remind us of just how real this issue is in our nation and how critical it is for us to engage in these important conversations in very informed ways. So thank you for your deep interest. If today's program gave you insight, if you want to invite one of your friends or family members to watch it, or if you want to watch it again, you can find it anytime on our site at Faytene.tv. And while you're there, would you prayerfully consider making a donation or becoming one of our amazing monthly partners? It's your support that enables us to keep bringing these informative and insightful conversations into the homes of Canadians from sea to sea every single week. And every gift, large or small, truly makes an impact. And remember, if you ever have a personal prayer request or maybe a question about faith, our team is here for you. Just give us a call at 1-866-844-0844. We'd be honored to pray with you, stand with you in your journey, and serve you in any way that we can. Thanks again for spending this time with us. Bless you and your loved ones, and I look forward to seeing you next week.